The ship fell from the sky like a dying star. Commander Yara Chen watched the emergency screens flash red and knew they had no chance of reaching their destination. The colony ship Perseverance had traveled for 12 years through the darkness between stars, carrying 3,000 sleeping humans toward a new home. Now its main drive was failing, and they were going to crash on a world that wasn't even on their maps. Chun made the only choice she could. She woke the senior crew and told them to prepare for emergency landing. There was no time for panic. There was no time for anything except action. The ship hit atmosphere at a bad angle, and pieces of its hull tore away like paper in a storm. Chun stayed at her command station until the very end, guiding what was left of the Perseverance toward a mountain valley that looked like it might not kill them all. The crash killed 400 people. Some died in their sleep pods, never knowing what happened. Others died when sections of the ship broke apart on impact. When Chun climbed out of the wreckage, her arm broken and her face covered in blood, she saw a valley filled with twisted metal and small fires. She also saw survivors, thousands of them, stumbling out of the ruins, looking at an alien sky they had never meant to see. There was no time to grieve. Chun knew that grief was a luxury they couldn't afford. She gathered the survivors together and started giving orders. They needed shelter. They needed water. They needed to know what was edible on this world and what would kill them. The colonists had trained for building a new civilization, and now they would do exactly that. Even though everything had gone wrong, they didn't know they were being watched. Corvus was young by the standards of his kind, only 200 years old. He had scales the color of storm clouds and wings that could carry him silently through mountain passes. He was a scout for the Dracane, the dragons who had ruled this world since before the first trees grew. When he saw the fire in the sky, he went to investigate. What he found confused him. The creatures were small and soft. They had no scales, no claws, no wings. They couldn't breathe fire or survive a fall from any height. Corvus had seen many species in his 2 centuries of life, but he had never seen anything that looked so helpless. He watched them for a full day, waiting to see what they would do. He expected them to scatter and die, like baby birds fallen from a nest. Instead, they organized. Corvus watched the small female with the broken arm give commands. He watched the others listen to her, even though she was clearly injured. They pulled metal from the wreckage and used it to build shelters. They found a stream and set up a system to collect clean water. They buried their dead in neat rows and marked each grave with a small stone. Then they went back to work. He reported what he saw to the Elder Council, the ancient dragons who made all important decisions for the Dracane. The council listened to his report with mild interest. They had encountered other species from the stars before. Some had tried to fight and been burned to ash. Some had tried to run and been hunted down. Some had begged for mercy and been allowed to serve. These new creatures would likely follow one of those paths. The eldest of the council, Matriarch Cervena, asked Corvus what he thought of these beings. He admitted that he didn't know. They were clearly weak, but they didn't act weak. They worked together in ways that reminded him of insects, but they showed individual thought and feeling. When one of them died from injuries, the others gathered around and made sounds of sadness. But then they dried their eyes and returned to their tasks. The council decided to wait and watch. Winter was coming, and it would be harsh. The mountains where these creatures had landed were unforgiving, even for Dracane. Cold and hunger would do what claws and fire might not need to. Let nature test these soft beings, the elders agreed. Let them prove what they were made of. Corvus was assigned to continue watching. He did his duty, staying hidden in the high rocks above the valley. He saw the humans, as they called themselves, face problem after problem. Their food supplies ran low. Their shelters leaked when it rained. A rock slide killed 12 of them while they were trying to clear a path. Each time something went wrong, Corvith expected them to finally give up. Each time they disappointed him. The female with the healed arm, the one they called Commander, never stopped working. She slept only a few hours each night. She visited every shelter, talked to every family, learned every name. When people were scared, she sat with them. When people were angry, she listened. When people wanted to give up, she reminded them why they could single quotes to dot winter came early and brutal. Snow fell for days without stopping. The temperature dropped so low that water froze in seconds. Corvith, wrapped in his own wings for warmth, watched the human camp and waited for the end. He saw them huddled together in their shelters, burning precious fuel to stay warm. He saw them share their small food rations equally, no one taking more than their share. He saw them take turns staying awake to keep the fires burning. Not one of them froze alone. Not one of them was abandoned. When spring finally came, Corvith flew to the council with a strange feeling in his ancient heart. The humans were still alive. All of them. He didn't understand how, but he knew he wanted to find out. Spring came to the valley like a gift. The snow melted, the streams ran fast and cold, and the humans emerged from their shelters, thinner but alive. Corvith watched them from his high perch and saw something that troubled him. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were building. The Elder Council was not pleased with his reports. These creatures should have died. Their survival was an insult to the natural order, to the understanding that soft things perished in hard places. Matriarch Cervena suggested that perhaps it was time to stop watching and start testing. They sent Lysara. She was not old by dragon standards, only 500 years, but she was proud and fierce. Her scales were the deep red of dried blood, and her eyes held the fire that all Drachang carried in their bellies. She landed in the valley, clearing with a sound like thunder, her wings spreading wide enough to cast the whole human camp in shadow. Commander Chun walked out to meet her alone. Corvith watched from the rocks, certain he was about to see the human leader die. Lysara could kill with a single breath, a single swipe of her claws. But Chun didn't run. She didn't scream. She stood in front of a creature that could destroy her entire people, and asked if they could talk. Lysara was prepared for many responses. She was not prepared for that one. The dragon delivered her message. The Drachane were the rulers of this world. All species that came here either submitted to their rule or were destroyed. The humans had one cycle of the moon to make their choice. Submit, and they would live as servants. Refuse, and they would burn. Chun listened to all of this without expression. Then she asked questions. What did submission mean? What rights would humans have? What would be expected of them? Lysara found herself answering, though she had expected to simply deliver her ultimatum and leave. The human kept asking, kept pushing, kept treating the negotiation like it was a conversation between equals. When Lysara explained that submitted species served the Drachane in various ways, including as food, something changed in Chun's eyes. The fear didn't appear. Instead, something harder came into focus. She said that those terms were not acceptable. She said humans would never agree to be eaten or enslaved. She asked for time to prepare a counter-proposal. Lysara didn't know what to do with that. No species had ever proposed counters before. She agreed to wait, if only because she was curious what these strange creatures would suggest. During the waiting period, the mountains decided to test everyone. A volcanic fissure opened without warning, tearing through rock and earth. Rivers of lava began flowing toward both the human settlement and toward something the humans hadn't known existed, a Drachane nesting ground, hidden in a cave system to the east. The adult dragons could fly to safety. The eggs could be carried, but the young hatchlings, too big to carry and too small to fly, were trapped. Chun heard the dragon cries. She didn't hesitate. The humans had been working on vehicles built from salvaged ship parts. They were rough and ugly and barely functional. Chun ordered every one of them toward the nesting ground. Corvus watched in disbelief as humans drove into danger to save the children of the species that had threatened to eat them. The rescue was chaos. Humans lifted dragon hatchlings into vehicles while lava crept closer. The heat was unbearable for the soft-skinned creatures. Several were badly burned. One man, a geologist named David Okonkwo, saw a clutch of eggs directly in the lava's path. He ran to them and used his own body as a shield while others loaded the eggs onto a transport. The lava reached him before the transport could leave. Corvus arrived too late to help. He found Okonkwo's body, burned beyond recognition, curled around the space where the eggs had been. The eggs were safe. The man was not. Corvus didn't understand. The dragons had threatened these humans. The dragons had called them food. And this human had died to save dragon children. The Sara returned to the Elder Council with her report. She spoke of the human counter-proposal, but she spent more time talking about Okonkwo. She described how the humans had mourned him, gathering together and speaking about his life, about his kindness and his bravery. She described how they had buried him with the same care they buried all their dead, marking his grave with a stone and his name. The council was silent for a long time. Corvus spoke without being asked, which was not proper for one so young. He said that in 200 years of life, he had never seen anything like these creatures. He had watched them refuse to die in winter. He had watched them organize from nothing. He had watched one of them burn alive to protect dragon eggs. He didn't know what they were, but he knew they weren't like anything the Dracane had faced before. Matriarch Sorvana looked at him with ancient eyes. She asked if he thought the humans were dangerous. Corvus considered the question carefully. He thought about Chun's steady gaze as she faced the Sara. He thought about Okonkwo's burned body. He thought about 3,000 soft creatures who had refused to die. Yes, he said, finally. They were the most dangerous things he had ever seen, but not in the way the council expected. The Elder Council argued for 3 days. Some wanted the humans destroyed immediately. Creatures that unpredictable, that willing to sacrifice themselves, could not be allowed to grow stronger. Others argued that destroying them would be wrong in a way that was hard to explain. The Dracane had always killed or enslaved other species because those species were lesser. But these humans had done something no other species had done. They had earned respect. Matriarch Sorvana ended the debate. She was older than anyone could count, old enough to remember when the Dracane were young and struggling themselves. She said that in all her endless years, she had never suggested what she was about to suggest. She proposed that the Dracane negotiate with the humans as equals. The council erupted in fury. Equals? These soft, short-lived creatures? But Sorvana raised her wing for silence. She reminded them that David Okonkwo had died for dragon children. She asked how many Dracane would have done the same for human young. The silence that followed was her answer. The Sara flew back to the human camp with different words this time. She asked Commander Chun what humans actually wanted. Chun was tired. She had barely slept since the volcanic disaster. She had burns on her arms from helping with the rescue. But she sat with the dragon and answered honestly. Humans wanted to go home, but their ship was destroyed. Since that was impossible, they wanted to live peacefully on this world. They wanted to trade with the Dracane, if trade was possible. They wanted to be left alone if trade was not. They had no interest in ruling anyone or taking anything that wasn't theirs. The Sara asked why humans had helped save the dragon young when Dracane had threatened to eat them. Chun thought for a long moment before answering. She said that humans were not good at being sensible. They helped because children were in danger, and that was enough. It didn't matter whose children they were. It didn't matter what the parents had done or said. When children needed help, humans helped. It was simply who they were. The negotiations began in earnest. They were slow and frustrating. Dragons and humans thought differently about almost everything. Drakane measured time in centuries and planned accordingly. They were solitary by nature, coming together only to mate or to address threats. They valued strength and patience above all else. Humans were the opposite in nearly every way. They measured time in years and decades. They lived in groups and drew strength from those groups. They valued connection and progress. Corvith was assigned to live among the humans as a liaison. He was chosen because he was young enough to adapt, and because he had shown more interest in understanding these creatures than any other dragon. He built himself a shelter at the edge of the human camp and began the strange process of learning how they lived. What he saw confused him. Daily, he watched humans work themselves to exhaustion and then celebrate small victories with singing and laughter. He watched them argue fiercely and then embrace moments later. He watched them grieve their dead with tears that seemed to break them, and then return to work the next day as if nothing had happened. He watched a woman give birth in the medical shelter, and he saw how the entire camp rejoiced for a new life while still mourning the hundreds they had lost. He asked Chun how they could feel so many things without being destroyed by it. She told him that feeling things deeply was what kept them alive. Grief reminded them what they had lost and made them determined not to lose more. Joy reminded them what they were fighting for. Love connected them to each other and gave them reasons to continue when continuing seemed impossible. The feelings were not weaknesses to be controlled. They were fuel for the fire that kept burning. Corvith thought about this for many nights. The turning point came when sickness spread through the Drakane nesting grounds. It was a disease their ancient immune systems couldn't fight, something new that had perhaps come from the same place the humans had. Dragon hatchlings and eggs were dying by the hundreds. The healers couldn't stop it. Nothing could stop it, except the humans. Their doctors worked without rest. They studied the disease, tested treatments, and found a cure. They gave it freely to the Drakane, asking for nothing in return. Human doctors walked into dragon caves and treated creatures that could kill them with a single breath. They saved thousands of lives. Matriarch Savannah came to the human camp herself, the first time she had left her mountain in 300 years. She found the human medical team exhausted and thin, having given everything they had to help dragons they barely knew. She asked them why. A young doctor named James looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. He said they were doctors. Helping was what doctors did. It didn't matter if the patient had scales or skin. Life was life. Sorvena looked at this small, fragile creature who had worked himself nearly to death for her people. She felt something she hadn't felt in 1,000 years. She felt humbled. She returned to the council and declared that the debates were over. The humans were to be treated as allies, as friends, as equals. Any Drakane who harmed them would answer to her personally. The world was changing, and the Drakane would change with it or be left behind. Not everyone agreed. But for now, Sorvena's word was law. The age of coexistence had begun. 5 years passed. The valley transformed into something no one could have predicted. Human buildings and dragon aeries stood side by side. Markets opened where humans and Drakane traded goods and knowledge. Dragonfire helped clear land and forge metal. Human engineering created tools the dragons had never imagined. Together, they built a civilization. But change always has enemies. A dragon named Korax remembered the old ways. He was a warrior, 700 years old, covered in scars from battles against species that no longer existed. He believed the alliance with humans had corrupted his people. He watched young dragons learning human languages, trading with human merchants, even forming friendships with the soft creatures. It disgusted him. He gathered others who felt the same. They met in secret in high mountain caves, far from human eyes. They planned an attack that would end the alliance forever. They struck on a moonless night. Dragon. Fire fell on the human settlement without warning. Homes burned. People screamed. Dozens died in the first moments, caught sleeping in their beds. Korax expected the rest to scatter and run. He expected easy slaughter. He was wrong. Commander Chun had never trusted completely. She had positioned guards and created emergency plans. When the attack began, alarms sounded throughout the camp. Humans grabbed weapons and ran not away from the danger, but toward it. The battle was terrible. Humans were small and soft, easy to kill. But they fought in teams, covering each other, creating crossfire that even dragons couldn't avoid. They used explosives salvaged from the ship. They used vehicles as mobile cover. They used every trick and tactic they had learned in there. Species' long history of surviving things that should have killed them. And they were not alone. Corvus heard the screams and flew toward the camp without thinking. The Zara followed. Then others, dragons who had eaten human food, traded human goods, learned human names. They attacked Korax's forces from above, brother fighting brother in the night sky. Chun was hurt early in the fighting. A piece of debris cut her leg to the bone. She refused to leave the command center. She directed her people from a building that was slowly burning around her, her voice calm even as the fire grew closer. Korax broke through the human lines. He landed in front of the burning building and tore through the wall like it was made of paper. He found Chun inside, alone, out of ammunition, holding a broken piece of pipe as a weapon. She was small and wounded and absolutely certain to die. She looked up at him without fear. She told him that he had already lost. Not this battle, though he had lost that too. He had lost the future. His kind could only imagine domination, only understand strength as destruction. Humans had survived ice ages. They had survived plagues. They had survived their own star dying. They would survive him. Korax raised his claw to strike. Corvus' fire hit him from behind. The ancient warrior turned, shocked that one of his own kind would attack him to protect a human. That moment of shock was enough. Corvus' claws found his throat. Korax died looking into the eyes of a young dragon who had chosen humans over his own blood. The battle ended before dawn. Korax's forces were dead or scattered. The human settlement was badly damaged but standing. Both sides had lost people they loved. The funeral was held together, humans and dragons mourning side by side. They burned the dead in the dragon tradition and marked them with stones in the human way. Commander Chun, her leg wrapped in bandages, stood beside Matriarch Cervena and spoke of those they had lost. She spoke of sacrifice and hope and the future they were building together. 100 years later, the world had a new name, Haven. Human lifespans had been extended through dragon medicine. Dragon society had changed through human ideas. The first joint starship sat on a launching pad, built from technologies neither species could have created alone. It would carry both humans and dragons to new worlds, new futures. Corvus was old now, 300 years, an ambassador who spoke for both peoples. He stood on a hill above the valley and watched the ship prepare for launch. He thought about the day he had first seen humans climbing from their crashed vessel, broken and bleeding and absolutely refusing to die. He understood now what made them special. It wasn't their tools, or their adaptability, or their strange ability to survive anything. It was simpler than that. Humans felt everything. They loved with their whole hearts and grieved with their whole souls. They burned with passion and connection and hope. They looked at a universe that didn't care about them and answered with caring about each other. They were fragile. They were short-lived. They were soft and small and easy to kill, and they were magnificent. The ship launched into the sky. Corvith watched it climb toward the stars, carrying human and dragon together into the unknown. He thought about the long road that had brought them here, the deaths and the discoveries, the battles and the friendships. The universe was vast and old and full of dangers. But it had never faced anything like this. Two species, once enemies, now family, reaching for the stars together. The universe had no idea what was coming.